French Revolution, and Napoleon Bonaparte. By the mid-1700s, France faced a growing crisis. The economy was in serious trouble. Attempts to solve the problems of the country would be hampered by the traditional political and social system of France. Under the old regime, the king was an absolute monarch. Louis XIV had centralized power in the royal bureaucracy, the department that carried out his policies. The people in France was divided into three estates. The first estate consisted of the higher clergy. The clergy managed church affairs, ran schools, kept birth and death records. The second estate is made up of less 2% of the French population, which is the nobles. Only nobles became officers in the army or filled high offices in the church. The third estate included bourgeoisie, as well as the peasants and city workers. In 1770s, economic slowed. Poor harvest the economy. However, the most serious economic problem facing the French government during 1770s and 1780s was the huge debt it owed to bankers. The government borrowed a large amount of money to pay for the wars of Louis XIV. Louis XV and Louis XVI continued to borrow money to support the Versailles in the final wars to maintain French power in Europe and overseas. When Louis XVI came to the throne in 1774, he saw the need of economic reform. But Louis was not a determined ruler. He preferred to spend his days hunting and tinkering the puzzles rather than copying with economic problems. At 15 years old, Marie Antoinette of Austria married Louis, heir to the first throne. When Louis became king, the new queen gave no thought to the welfare of the people. Instead, she spent lavishly on dresses and jewelry. As economic conditions in France worsened, many people blamed the queen. State elected its own delegates or deputies to the States General, joined by many of the lower clergy and some of the reform-minded nobles. Deputies of the third estate meet separately, joined by many of the lower clergy and some reform-minded nobles. Deputies of the third estate gathered at a nearby tennis court. There they swore an oath, known as the tennis court oath, promising to disband until they had written a constitution. The National Assembly had scarcely begun work on a constitution in July 1789 when the people of Paris and peasants in the countryside took the French Revolution along a new, more radical course. On July 14, 1789, a Paris crowd stormed the Bastille. By 3 p.m. that day, a large mob had surrounded the fortress, demanding its surrenders. As the commander of the Bastille, Marquis de Launay, did not defend the outer drawbridge. Instead, de Launay offered to surrender the fortress if his troops were allowed to leave peacefully. But the crowd replied, "No surrender, lower the bridge." Deflue watched helplessly as the second drawbridge was lowered and the mob swarmed into the courtyard. Armed with axes, the crowd went to the prison cells and freed the astonished inmates. The mob found only 7 prisoners in the entire fortress. To the common people in Paris, the Bastille stood for the tyranny of the absolute monarch in France. The events in Paris and the countryside forced the National Assembly into action. By the end of the evening, the Assembly had abolished most feudal customs. Few people were satisfied with the new constitutional monarchy. Radical revolutionaries wanted a republic rather than a monarchy. Louis XVI grew increasingly alarmed at the actions of the National Assembly. He sought outside help, and Marie Antoinette appealed to her brother, the Emperor of Austria, for support. In June 1791, the royal family decided to flee the country. As they fled toward the border, however, the king was recognized. The National Assembly sent officers to arrest the royal family and bring them back to the capital. In November, the convention announced that a trunk had been discovered containing letters written by the king. The damaging evidence sealed the king's fate. The convention tried and convicted Louis XVI of treason by a majority of 1 vote. The delegates sentenced him to death. On January 21, 1793, Louis mounted the steps of the guillotine. "People, I die innocent," were the king's last word to the watching crowd. News of Louis XVI's execution sent shock waves through the capitals of Europe. Other monarchs now had every reason to fear the spread of the revolution. During the Reign of Terror, trials were held almost daily throughout France. Between 20,000 to 40,000 men, women, and children were condemned to guillotine. The former queen was one victim. Between 1789 and 1794, French life had been transformed. The monarchy was gone and the king was dead. French society had become more democratic, arts and fashion had changed. When Napoleon Bonaparte was 10 years old, his father took from his home in Corsica and enrolled him in the military. After his military training in military academy, he rose quickly in the army during the revolution because so many officers had fled France. In 1793, Napoleon commanded the French troops that ousted the British from Toulon. By age 27, Napoleon was a general. The young general's monarchy was gone and the king was dead. French society had become more democratic, arts and fashion had changed. When Napoleon Bonaparte was 10 years old, his father took from his home in Corsica and enrolled him in the military. After his military training in military academy, he rose quickly in the army during the revolution because so many officers had fled France. In 1793, Napoleon commanded the French troops that ousted the British from Toulon. By age 27, Napoleon was a general. The young general soon received command of a French army for an invasion of Egypt. He won several victories over the Austrians. Napoleon's success forced Austria to withdraw the war in 1797. This left Britain as the only country still fighting in France. I am no ordinary man. Napoleon was boasted. He was a person who could command the attention of France as well as enemies, and he was admired by soldiers all over Europe. 2 years later, Napoleon proclaimed himself as Emperor of the French. By 1804, Napoleon had gained almost absolute power. Therefore, he continued many reforms of the revolution. One of Napoleon's greatest achievements in government was the Napoleonic Code, which was influenced French law to present. To strengthen the economy, Napoleon enforced a law requiring all citizens to pay taxes. In 1807 to 1812, Napoleon was at the height of his power. His powers stretched from France to the borders of Russia. Opposition to Napoleon grew among the conquered and allied peoples of Europe because they were developing sense of nationalism or pride and devotion to one's own country. People resented paying taxes to France and sending soldiers to serve in Napoleon's armies. They wanted to restore their governments, customs, and traditions. Napoleon planned to defeat the Russians in a quick, decisive battles. To his surprise, the Russians refused to stand and fight. Instead, they retreated before his army, burning their crops and homes as they went. The French won the battle, but when Napoleon entered the city, he found deserted and in flames. Napoleon soon realized he could not feed